Welcome to Mind Tricks Radio, where we'll explore contemporary topics in psychology through interviewing creative and innovative thinkers in the field. I'm your host, Dr. Aaron Kaplan. Thanks for tuning in. We're here today once again with my good friend and colleague, Dr. Tyler Ralston. He has been a guest on the show a few times, including some fun episodes we did on unwarranted guilt, on identifying red flags in abusive relationships. And there was the one about Tyke the elephant. That was a fun one with Dr. Tyler's experiences with a elephant that went rampaging through the streets of Hawaii. You remember that episode, Tyler, right? That was kind of a fun one. Yeah. And then most recently, you came back and we talked about the concept of psychological flexibility, which was very interesting. And so today we are talking about this concept of learned helplessness and sort of its counterpart, learned optimism, which I think we can see kind of in light of learned helplessness has come through the positive psychology literature. So we'll talk a bit about that. So first off, Tyler, welcome back. It's great to see you again.
Oh, thanks. Yes, likewise. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So first off, let's just start by talking a little bit about the concept of learned helplessness. And then I want to get into some of these famous experiments that were done by Dr. Martin Seligman with the dogs to kind of highlight it. But what do you think when we think of the concept of learned helplessness, sort of how do we define it in a helpful way for people to understand? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, generally speaking, in kind of basic form, it's when someone, for example, has been in a situation where bad things have been happening to them over and over, and they've tried to either get it to stop or they've tried to escape it in numerous ways. They try to stop it or escape it, and none of it works. Eventually, they start to learn that they're helpless to affect the course that they're on. They're helpless to get it to stop. They're helpless to get away from it. Nothing they do will work. And therefore, why even try?
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great explanation. So sort of like people tend to give up or feel like it's pointless of trying, right? And so this leads into, you and I have talked about this before, this sort of downward spiral of like, I can't do anything to change my situation, so why try? You don't try, and by not trying, things don't get better, and they often get worse, and it feeds on it, and you sort of get deeper into a hole. Yeah.
Exactly. Downward spiral.
Right. Downward spiral. So, yeah. So, I thought before we continue with our conversation, I wanted to talk a little bit about these famous experiments that were done with the dogs, and that was with Martin Seligman. He's a psychologist who's very well known in the field. He's still alive. And he did these experiments with dogs back in the 60s and 70s. And they were quite interesting. Martin Seligman, by the way, was president of APA at one time. He's very well known in the field. And so these experiments that he did with dogs, and by the way, like these dog experiments that we're going to talk about, if it's upsetting to anybody, these experiments probably would not pass an IRB now. Like you couldn't do them now because it's pretty mean to the dogs, frankly. But back then in the 60s and 70s was in the beginning of psychology and psychological experiments, and a lot of the ethical changes that came about after that came from people examining the way experiments were done and changing it. So things changed over time, which is good. But some of these early experiments were really important for shaping psychology. And despite what people think about them now, really, really helped us understand psychological processes. So they were sort of foundational experiments. So, yeah, let's talk about the first one. I'll take the lead, Tyler, in talking about the Seligman dog experiments, and feel free to jump in, okay? If I'm missing something or if I'm misremembering something. The way that I remember it, the experiment had a few different phases. And in the first phase, Seligman had these sort of like these cages that had two sides to them. One side The dog would be inside the cage, and there would be a plate under the dog that if a switch was flicked, it would become electrified and the dog would get a shock. Am I remembering that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And then there was another side to the cage, and there was like a little wall between the two sides of the cage, and the dog could basically jump from one side to the other. He could jump from the side that had the electrified panel to the other side if it wanted to. So what Seligman did is he took from some of the classical conditioning literature and he paired the electrifying that side of the cage with a sound or some kind of a stimulus so the dog knows if this comes, I'm going to feel an electric shock. And once it learned that, what would it do? When it would hurt it, he would hear a buzzer and it would know a buzzer means a shock's coming. What did the dog do?
Yeah. Jump to the other side.
Right. As
Yeah.
any half
Yeah.
intelligent creature would do. Right.
Right. Get some
Escape.
relief.
Exactly. Right. So that happened. That was stage one of the experiment. The dog is learning bell rings or buzzer rings, jump to that other side, get away from being electrocuted. So then phase two of the experiment, same thing happened, but he put a barrier between the two sides of the cage. So the dog hears the buzzer, thinks, I'm going to jump to the other side of the cage, but now can't. There's no place for the dog to go. So then what, Tyler? What happens to the dog in this phase of the experiment?
Well, initially, the dog will climb the walls trying to escape or keep its paws off of the electrified floor. But eventually, the dog will become exhausted and collapse on the floor and also realize it can't escape. And it will just kind of lie on the floor and moan and take the shock because its prior efforts to escape, climbing the walls, which it can't get out now, or, trying to escape the cage and get out. It's learned it's helpless.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. Right. Yeah, just like probably any organism, like you're in a situation and something bad's happening. The first thing you do is violently try to escape, and when you learn you can't, sooner or later, people just sort of lay down and take it. That's
Hmm.
right. So that is sort of, in a sense, the beginnings of learned helplessness. I'm helpless. I can't do anything. I'm going to stop even trying. So phase three of this experiment is actually the most interesting part. Phase three, the dog has now learned, buzzer happens, shock is coming, nowhere for me to jump, just lay down and get shocked. And by the way, right, these shocks didn't kill the dog, just to be clear. They were just very uncomfortable, uncomfortable enough that the dog would want to leave if it could. So in this next phase of the experiment, Seligman removed the barrier once again in the wall between the two parts of the cage. No more barrier. Dog can escape if it wants to. It has the ability to do that. Now, he flicks the switch that makes the buzzer sound. Shock is coming right after that. And this dog that previously could not escape if it wanted to, what does it do now that it can escape when it hears that buzzer if it wanted to?
It just stays,
Yeah,
does not escape because it has learned that any efforts it makes to try to escape are not going to work. It's learned I am helpless to affect the course of my situation.
right. And that's sort of counterintuitive, right? Because most of us would say, if I finally had the ability to escape, of course I would jump over that. The only reason I wasn't jumping was because it was blocked. But if it's not blocked, of course, as soon as it's unblocked, I'd get the hell out of there. And that's what you'd expect the dogs would do, but they didn't. They stayed laying in their side of the cage, even though they could get out if they wanted to. And that is really the core of the idea of learned helplessness. Exactly. So,
Hmm.
even if there might be options in front of me to get out, I'm not even taking them because I've learned to be helpless, and that's that. fascinating experiment, and there's been all sorts of variations of that over the years, both with Seligman and the dogs, and with other people who did other efforts to replicate it in different kinds of ways. But that's the kind of the core. So let's kind of translate that to what that might look like to humans. And obviously, it's not as clear with humans being placed in a cage that they can't escape and get shocks. That doesn't usually happen to most people. But the types of cages that humans might be in might be a lot much more metaphorical. And it's interesting here to discuss what the consequences are to people. Let's talk a little bit about that, Tyler. Like, what can
Yeah.
we say about the human condition and this idea of learned helplessness? What does that look like in humans, and why does that come about? How can we use the Seligman dogs as an example of that?
It can play out in many, many, many ways with all kinds of circumstances and situations. In my practice, at least, I see it a lot with clients who were in these relationships which are abusive and they wanted to get out, and they've tried many times to get out. Maybe they did leave for a bit, but for various reasons, it either got worse or something bad happened, and they learned that over time that their efforts to get out of this bad relationship just don't work. So going forward, it was sort of just like settle in and just kind of accept this is kind of what my fate is, or this is what I'm doing. And I'm helpless to make a change. I'm helpless to get the abuse to stop. I'm helpless to get myself out of this. And then eventually when they do get out by whatever means, eventually, maybe it's months, years, decades later, the learned helplessness way of thinking and behaving carries into many other aspects of their life often. It shows up in work and new relationships, in sports and whatever. It shows up where there tends to be some level, sometimes really extreme, of like, I can't do that. It's not going to work. Why even try? If it does work, it has nothing to do with me. And that's where we really see that locus of control shifting that comes with learned helplessness, where it's sort of like if something positive happens or if I can, it doesn't really have anything to do with me. It's because of some external situation, like maybe somebody had a good day and they helped me out with this or something, rather than, I have the ability to change this or make this differently. That'd be one example.
Right, and I think what you're talking about is like what we refer to like as the three P's of pessimistic thinking. And I want to dig into that a little bit in a
Sure.
few minutes more because I think that's a great point. But basically, to kind of summarize what you were saying about the relationships is you're in a relationship where you feel a bit powerless and helpless. Maybe the person is abusive in one way or another, and you end up feeling stuck, like nothing I can do really changes anything. And even if somehow or another I eventually get out of this relationship, I basically internalize this idea that like I can't really do much to change things and sort of give up and feel really pessimistic and unable to affect positive changes in your life. That's kind of how it settles in.
Yeah,
Yeah. And
totally.
I think another good example of this, Tyler, like even to get more sort of psychodynamic here, if you'll allow me, is this kind of idea of like even in childhood, right? If children grow up in an environment where they have parent like children are very powerless in reality in childhood because parents usually can control everything children do. They have a lot more control over their children than most adults really have over other adults. But as you and I both know, in good parenting, children try to allow their kids to learn autonomy, to learn how to feel like they can take control at whatever age specific level they're at, which is appropriate for them. And they learn autonomy and they learn, like, I'm not helpless in life. I can do things and I have parents that support me, but they're there as a safety net. But in bad situations, parents are constantly punishing, criticizing, taking things away, taking away autonomy, giving the child messages no matter what you do, you have no control here, and you're going to listen to me, and you're going to get punished, or something's bad's going to happen to you, or don't even try because you're a screwed up kid. Whatever negative things you can think of that leads the child to sort of learn, hey, why even bother? I'm powerless. I've got these parents who have the power of all of the decisions in my life, and so I'm not going to have them. And I think maybe some of that can be learned in that kind of setting too, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. For sure. For sure.
Or maybe
Hmm.
another kind of a side example of that is no matter what I do, if I'm doing well on a test or I'm doing well in school, I'm constantly being told you screwed up or you messed up and that's not good enough. Maybe you start to feel like I am powerless to really make something right. So I just expect it's
Hmm.
always going to be wrong.
Hmm. Even in a very simple version, like I don't get good grades, I go to a tutor over and over, I study long hours on the weekend, doing all this stuff, and my grades still aren't coming up. At some point, the person will learn I'm helpless to increase my no sense trying to go to a tutor anymore, or study all weekend or whatever. Just let me just shift into sort of just limping along,
Yeah.
not
But
really
don't you
trying,
think,
you know?
yeah, but don't you think like in that example though, it's not just maybe my grades aren't getting better, or I don't seem to be raising my scores, but it's probably also the messages that come along with that,
Yeah.
right? Like if the parents are saying, you better get these grades up, you better raise these scores, and if you don't, you're a dummy and you're too stupid to do any better. Like I think like with humans, like dogs obviously don't you're not having like conversations with dogs so they can internalize, cognitively their experience. But a lot of it is like these experiences happen to people and the messages that accompany them are kind of what is important about them feeling like it's helpless or pointless.
Yes.
So this learned helplessness, we talked a little bit about how it can kind of lead to sort of this pessimistic bias that people develop. And I want to just reiterate kind of what you said earlier, this idea with this pessimistic bias that people who are pessimistic tend to see setbacks, or let's just call them failures, even though that's kind of a loaded word, but setbacks or failures as permanent examples of how, like, this is what it's going to be like forever. They're pervasive, meaning they show up everywhere in my life, no matter what I do. And it's personal. These setbacks are because of me and something fundamentally about me as a person. Does that sound sort of accurate?
Yeah.
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 What more can we say about the permanent one? So somebody who's pessimistic, learned to feel helpless is pessimistic. How do they see setbacks as permanent?
Well, it's never going to change. I've already tried a whole bunch of things. Nothing's ever worked. I've been doing this for months or years now, or, whatever period of time, tried many times, many different ways. Nothing's changing. Nothing, I can't affect any change. So this is permanent. It's never going to change. Even if I make extended or continued efforts to get it to go in the way that I want, it's just not going to work. It's permanent. I might as well just not even try.
Yeah, right. And how about pervasive?
That pattern of learned helplessness doesn't necessarily just apply to the one type of situation in which they learned it. It can do that, but it usually will generalize to all kinds of things where the person learns about themselves that I'm helpless to affect change in all kinds of ways, relationships, employment, whatever else.
Yeah, so maybe like somebody with pervasive, let's just somebody was particularly not great at math and they're not
Mhm.
doing well at math and they sort of say, yeah, it doesn't matter what I do. I just do badly in everything. I just kind of can't do well on things. And really, they just may have some kind of a deficit with math for whatever reason, but that doesn't mean that they're going to fail at everything they try to do. But a pessimistic person tends to say like, well, I just nothing's really going to work out for me in any realm. Yeah.
Exactly.
And then how about personal setbacks are personal? I think this is kind of interesting. It ties in
Yeah.
with the other two.
What do you hear? How do you hear that in your practice? What are some examples that you've heard of that?
For me, I think it's mostly people feeling like there's something wrong with them. Most people don't literally say I'm cursed, but it's kind of that idea that like if things are going wrong with me and I'm the common denominator, I must really suck. I'm a failure as a human. I am personally the cause of everything bad that happens to me. It's because of me. So it doesn't really matter where I go or what I do. I'm the constant. So things are going to always go wrong for me because I'm causing it. I guess
Mhm.
that's sort of the way I would look at it.
That's how I see it as well, and coupled with that, not to steer it in a different direction, but the other sort of related part is if something goes positive, I often hear that it's not because of them, it's because they got lucky. Didn't have anything to do with me.
Yeah.
Oh, I got lucky, or somebody else had a good day, and so that's why that worked out. But if it's bad, it's me. If it's a bad outcome or it doesn't work, it's because of me. But if something good happens, it's not me.
Yeah, that is a great distinction. Thank you. So I do really well on a test, and I say, well, yeah, I got lucky because the teacher put items on the test that I just happened to study. If he put other ones on the test that I hadn't studied, it might not have gone so well. And I was going to choose between this and that, and I did a eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and I picked this one, and that's what it got it right that time. And also, I just studied really, really hard this time. But if I don't study really, really hard, I'm not going to get a good grade because I don't naturally good at this. So there's all those kinds of excuses.
Hmm.
So those are very cognitive in nature, right? We assume that the dogs aren't really thinking at a higher order level, but these are all cognitive biases that are bleeding in and shaping the way that we're thinking about the things going on around us. And presumably, if we've internalized this pessimistic style, we've learned helplessness where we think pessimistically. The thoughts we are having are keeping ourselves stuck in this space where we're not likely to succeed very much because we're telling ourselves that we can't. And those are all cognitive. So I think that's a pretty good segue to this idea of learned optimism. Now, Martin Seligman, I think he even wrote a book called Learned Optimism and started writing about this. I think he got just sort of tired of all of this learned helplessness, pessimism stuff at some point in his career. It was like a wet blanket for him. And he's like, hey, you know what? I kind of want to be more, I'm into this positive psychology thing. Let's talk about something that's just a little more uplifting. I think the idea here was like he thought if you could learn to feel helpless and get into this rut based on the way you're experiencing life and internalizing your thoughts about it, why can't you do the opposite? And so the opposite would be kind of having opposite cognitions and cognitive thought processes about the things going on in my life. What do you think, Tyler? Like, what would be some examples how, if a person was going to try to learn an optimistic point of view, what might that look like? What are some examples of that?
One way that comes to mind initially is to keep a negative outcome when it happens as just that event, just that instance, just that happening. Don't, be aware of not generalize it to like a broader, pervasive kind of a pattern. So for example, if a person, wants to be a better swimmer, they've been in a swim club or a swim team, they go to a swim meet and they've been putting in a lot of work, but they come in last at the swim meet. Somebody who's got that pessimism going or generalizing that, or even some learned helplessness, but like, I'm a horrible swimmer, I'm a horrible athlete, I'm never going to be good at this. I don't even know if I want to continue to be on the team and keep practicing. Versus, okay, wait a second, let's talk about this. This was just one swim meet. People have ups and downs. One swim meet doesn't mean that you're gonna not, do good in swim meets. And it certainly doesn't mean that you're not a good athlete.
It also might mean that I'm not the greatest swimmer right now compared to the swimmers that I swam against in this particular meet, but it doesn't mean that I won't improve if I continue to try and work at it.
That's right. And that's not even talking at all about all the other aspects of swimming. If I just like to move my body in the water, even if I am last, but people that have some learned helplessness would be more likely to just sort of stop the whole thing. And yet we could talk about, when we look at being more optimistic, we can say, okay, well, what parts of swimming do you like? Even if you are last every time, do you like body movement? You get the exercise, some camaraderie, structure on the weekend to go do something with some other people socially, and yeah, okay, you come in last. And one can learn to think about that in that way that it becomes a positive, optimistic thing, even if they continue to be last every time in the race.
Great point. That's sort of like those people who kind of like chuckle and say, "Oh, I came in last in that race. I'm not so great at this, but I had a great time and it was fun and whatever. Maybe I'll get better, or maybe I won't, but who cares, right?" That sort of like lightens it up rather than making it so severe, like, "Oh, because I didn't do so great in this particular race, I kind of suck at this, and I probably suck at a lot of things because I'm no good," right?
Right. Well, how about for yourself? What do you think is an example of countering the learned helplessness with some learned optimism and building on that?
Well, I really like the idea of these cognitive reframing that we talk about. Like, for example, recognizing something that doesn't go well in a particular situation or something that you're not particularly good at, to be able to reframe it in those kinds of ways. And maybe I'm not so great at this now, but if I work at it, I will be. And even if I don't get so great at this, maybe this isn't my talent, but other things are more my talent. And everybody has talents, Tyler. I don't care who you are. Everybody has something that they can be good at it. A lot of the things that people can be good at take some work and effort. And so that's one thing that people need to understand, that if you're going to expect to be great or excel at something off the bat without putting the time and effort to do it, then that's not realistic. And if you give up feeling like I'm not good at this, then I might as well just give up on it. Then you're never going to get good at it or anything else if that's the attitude you have. So I should try to tell people, like, look, it's an upward spiral. We talk about that downward spiral with learned helplessness. It's an upward spiral with learned optimism. You try some things, you may not be great at it, but you try it. And the more you try it, the more successes you start to have. The more successes you start to have, the more it's a feedback loop. As long as you're not telling yourself the success is a fluke or I just got lucky, which is another reframe, as you mentioned earlier, that's important to do. And then you have the upward spiral. And I don't know how often you've come across patients like this in your practice, Tyler, but I've had many who are like really rock bottom, like we're talking like in a hospital, overdosed with substances, hearing voices, just like what you imagine, like you couldn't get too much farther from dying from where this person is right now. And they literally had to build themselves back up one step at a time and eventually became whatever, nurses or professional people. And it was a long haul, but that's exactly what they had to do. They had to see it as like, recognize it's going to be a long haul, and each step along the way is just going to be another sort of rung on the ladder to step up. And the higher you get, the more it's important to look back and say, good on me. I had these successes. I obviously can do it, but I also have a long way to go. And I'm not going to get to the finish line by taking one long step. I'm still going to have to take these small steps along the way and just level up each time. And then acknowledge my successes and also recognize I still have a way to go. And that's how you build yourself up. So I see that a lot. And it's not easy for people. What do you think?
Definitely. It speaks a lot to value in the upward spiral in the journey as well, whether one ever even reaches the goal or the end point. It's the aspiring in that upward direction has a lot of value in it of itself and counters helplessness because I can keep trying even if I don't get that goal. And if I find value in working on it and attempting it, that shifts away from value is only if you get the goal.
Yeah, I think that leads to a perfect example that you hear people say all the time, but I think people just give it lip service and really don't take it to heart. This idea that you learn from your mistakes, right? Like a pessimistic person would make a mistake and say, "See, I can't do it. I'm a loser. I'm helpless. I can't, I've got no control of my life." And this mistake is an example of that. And then they give up. Whereas an optimistic person tries to say, well, that was a mistake. There's a lot of reasons why that mistake happened. What did I learn from that mistake? And now how can I try to do it differently next time so that I have a better opportunity for succeeding at this thing? And then, of course, if you do that a few times, you start to feel more optimistic that even in the face of a mistake or a letdown or a setback, I can make a change, get back on that horse, and make things better for me. And I think the learned optimism is tied into that.
I have some self-efficacy. I can affect my own course, my journey,
Yep.
my outcomes, to some degree at least.
Absolutely. Right. So cool. So, let's kind of wind this down and maybe just summarize the key points, Tyler. First, with the learned helplessness, I'll start with that and maybe you could summarize the optimism ones. But for the helplessness, I would say for people to kind of recognize when they're stuck in a rut or stuck in a place that they feel, stuck, helpless, powerless, and really ask themselves, am I really stuck, helpless, or powerless, or am I just telling myself this? Maybe because I've been beaten down, maybe because I've had a lot of bad things happen to me or bad letdowns. But does that objectively mean that from today forward, I really am helpless to change things? Or are there options in front of me that allow me to do something different or take some new risks or chances? So you recognize when you're stuck, you're in a rut, and also those three P's of pessimistic thinking. Are setbacks, do I see them as sort of permanent, pervasive, and due to me, they're personal? And if you're doing those things, you're probably stuck in a learned helplessness cycle there. So that's it about learned helplessness. And then learned optimism, Tyler. What, as cognitive therapists, what are the main takeaways there for what people can look out for?
Yeah, there's some of them are the idea that, continuing to take forward steps and keeping outcomes that maybe don't work out in perspective. This is just this outcome. I can continue to take these forward steps and start to spin this spiral upward. I can keep it all in perspective and realize that everybody has ups and downs, but the downs don't have to stop my journey, and they certainly don't mean that I'm helpless. And as one moves up that spiral, looking back to see how far they've come, and actually, look, I've made it this far simply or largely because I've put in the effort and kept going rather than, stop because of a conclusion that I'm helpless or something like that. I can make a change here. We wouldn't say, oh, it's just sort of artificial positive thinking, think on the bright side, but it's just keep on going. And eventually, and usually sooner than later, the evidence starts to show that I'm not helpless.
Yeah.
And then naturally people become more optimistic that they can affect change in their life in a positive direction or a direction that they aspire to affect change in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're hitting a really crucial point there that you and I have talked about a lot as people in practice cognitive behavioral therapy with our patients. And that's the idea of examining evidence and data. It's one thing, this sort of this pop psychology idea of like, just think positively, think how great you are, wonderful you are, and everything's going to be great. And just, you're awesome the way you are. It's just you and you're going to succeed. Like, people don't buy that. But what they do buy is if you can say, well, let's quantify this. Like, how do we know whether you are a capable person or you're a person who can do X, Y, and Z, or you have the capacity for it? How do we know? Well, we look back at evidence and data. What things have happened in your trajectory that we can say, look, well, those ones didn't go well that you're talking about from 5 years ago. But when you tried this thing last week that we suggested, you try and see how it went pretty well. So now you're consciously trying something. You've got at least one piece of evidence or data that counteracts your thoughts about yourself, that are other negative thoughts about yourself or pessimistic thoughts. So we use a lot of evidence or data and we try to be objective about that and not swipe it away like, well, that's a fluke or that's just a lucky thing. No, it is a piece of evidence or data that helps inform how you might think about yourself.
And that happened because of you and your efforts.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Hey, Tyler, this has been really fun talking about learned helplessness and learned optimism. And I always love talking about Seligman's dogs. It always gives me a kick. I love that experiment. So it was fun having you here today. Any final thoughts or
Oh,
any?
thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure. I enjoyed as well.
Okay, Tyler. Yeah, great to see you. Take care, and we'll have another one of these fun conversations soon. Thank you for listening to Mind Tricks Radio. I hope you have enjoyed the program. For more information about Mind Tricks, please go to my website, www.waikikihealth.com. Please be sure to subscribe to Mind Tricks podcast and accompanying blog to be notified of new episodes of Mind Tricks. Please be sure to follow Mind Tricks on Facebook by following and liking posts by myself, your host, Dr. Aaron Kaplan.